Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar, Off-Grid, On Target, Tackling Hard-to-Abate Emissions in Remote Destinations as part of our Road to Net Zero series. So I'm really excited to be moderating this session. We're going to explore the unique challenges and innovative solutions around decarbonizing tourism operations in one of the most, or in some of the most, remote and pristine destinations across the world. So remote tourism plays a vital role in the tourism industry because it allows people to experience these breathtaking places like polar regions, remote islands, to wilderness areas. So these destinations, really amaze us, the visitors with their untouched beauty, biodiversity, offering a sense of adventure, and also usually away from the large crowds that we see today in tourism destinations. So, however, the things that make these places so appealing also create big challenges when it comes to reducing carbon emissions. So we're going to frame our conversation around a few key facts. Firstly, transportation emissions is one of the biggest hurdles in decarbonizing these remote tourism destinations. So if long distance travel, whether it be by air or by sea, can add significantly to the carbon footprint of getting the tourist to the destinations as well as supplying the tourist with, or the supplies that is needed to create these tourism experiences. So in fact, the tourism industry is responsible for about 8% of global carbon emissions, and transportation is a major part of that. Another key fact for these places is the limitations in infrastructure. So this is a key challenge in these destinations. A lot of these remote destinations lack the infrastructure for low carbon technologies. So they sometimes depend on diesel generators, imported goods, and sometimes they even have to ship waste outside for their disposal. So making it very hard to really be able to manage sustainable operations. And of course, these regions are highly vulnerable to climate change. We're facing a sea level rise, melting ice caps, shifting wildlife patterns, extreme weather, and of course, ironically, the very ecosystem that tourism depend on for these destinations are at risk from carbon-intensive activities to bring these people there. And finally, a growing challenge is being able to measure accurately the carbon emissions from scope 3 emissions to operate these activities. And of course, there are more and more regulations, EU regulations and US regulations that require us to be able to measure and mitigate the carbon footprint. So with that framework, we're very lucky to have 3 industry leaders who are tackling these hard-to-abate emissions in remote destinations. So here we have today Whelan from Natural Habitat Adventures, who will share with us their wilderness safaris and how they're reducing the carbon footprint and moving towards zero waste. Renée Kimball from Tranquilo Bay Eco Lodges, who will discuss how their island lodges is focusing on local food sourcing and creating ways to reduce transportation needs. And Carly Biggart from Hurtigruten, who will explain how the company is leveraging fuel-efficient ships in their plans to introduce zero-emission ships by 2030. So through their insights, through their experiences and knowledge, we're going to explore practical strategies to address these tough emissions and challenges faced in remote destinations. So let's dive in. So first of all, besides representing sustainable operations that you do, all of you have very unique experience that led you to where you are today. So I would love for you to be able to introduce yourselves and explain what inspired you to actually work in these, to solve these, create these solutions and work for these amazing organizations that are focused on reducing, carbon emissions and also taking us to these beautiful, pristine places. So Carly, let's start with you. You work for Hurtigruten, one of the most sustainable operators, out there. So tell us about your path.
So I actually don't come from travel, which is rarer, I would say. I come from the telecom industry. And funny enough, when I was there, we actually launched the first eco phone many, many years ago. So I feel like when Hurtigruten came into my path, I felt like it was such the right fit once I saw their sustainability platform. It's not a platform. Sustainability is part of Hurtigruten and who they are. And every person that I talk to, it's an integral part of this organization. So I just knew that in my own career path, my own adventure, once I learned what they were doing and the vision for the future and what we need to do as a travel industry, you want to be part of it.
Absolutely. No, Hurtigruten is very, very inspiring. And Court, I think you've been, from the beginning of your career, you've been in sustainability and conservation. So yeah, tell us about, what inspired you.
Yeah, sure thing. So I really built myself as a conservation biologist and started in academia way back when. I've been now involved in tourism and travel for over 20 years, but a lot of that was overlapped with this conservation biology program at University of Florida, which Paloma and I just realized we attended together, which is great. Go Gators. So yeah, it was an academic background, and very early on realized this is kind of in the early phases of ecotourism, the term ecotourism kind of in the late 90s, early aughts, where it was, just kind of becoming a household term. And I just realized that it was one of the most powerful ways to save the world by adding value to nature and wildlife. And so, fast forward through various degrees and various expeditions, and I now head up sustainability at Natural Habitat, doing all sorts of crazy one-off inventive things like zero waste trips and doing industry first, like becoming the world's first carbon neutral travel company, all the way to more time-honored kind of building programs like our Science-Based Targets Initiative and decarbonization, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. But I'm also an expedition leader with us as well, which kind of goes back to the root of my love of just being out in nature and teaching and informing and inspiring. It's a big part of what we do. I can't overstate that enough, as the inspiration and influence of travel is what makes all of this, no matter what we're talking about today, a huge net positive for conservation in the world.
Excellent. And also, sustainable travel and NatHab also have a history. We were also started, the carbon program, back in the day when it wasn't even that popular. So yeah, we have a history there. And Renée, you're one of the pioneers of ecotourism, having founded Tranquilo over 20 years ago. So it must be, I would love to, learn a little bit more, and our audience as well. What inspired you, to start this project in Bocas del Toro?
Well, I mean, I was a practicing attorney in Houston, Texas. And I came here to the lush jungles of Panama 20 years ago. And really, it comes down to my parents instilled a level of responsibility for me to take care of your neighborhood. And so by moving to Bocas del Toro, I just have a very much more expansive definition of neighborhood. And one of my core beliefs is importing people and place. And so we really look at stewardship and how it transcends boundaries. And we use that to create treasured memories and meaningful impacts through this island eco lodge and what we do each day. This morning, I was helping my daughter with her scholarship applications for going off to university. And it was very interesting to see what she is incorporating into who she is and why she's doing things. And seeing how it's become part of her has made me realize that choosing to leave Houston and take a huge pay cut and do different things was definitely worth the change in life, which has made me rich in ways that you cannot quantify from a monetary perspective.
That's a lovely story. And I think it's, it teaches us that, some people are not doing what they love doing, they're like stuck in a job, and you can change and you can do better. You can work in a field that actually makes you, more fulfilled. And I feel that all of us, are very lucky, the ones that are here today. And so with that inspiration, let's begin our conversation. So let's start with the elephant in the room, which is transportation, right? So that's the biggest culprit. We need to take the tourists to these remote destinations, and it relies heavily on transportation to take them to the destinations and also to supply them. So I would love to hear from you. What are some of those effective ways that you found to minimize transportation, particularly in areas where you lack the infrastructure? And then of course, again, you have to like understand, you need to be able to understand the carbon footprint so that you can also, reduce it. So how do you measure also that impact? So it's a big question, but I think all of you are, working, towards that goal. So yeah, Court, let's start with your experience.
Yeah, sure thing. So yeah, you kind of mentioned, how do we measure and quantify that impact? So since we've been calculating our carbon footprint since 2007 in every which way, shape, or form, is one of these knowledge is power sort of things. Like we deeply understand where the emissions are. We've sort of elevated that in a transparent way for the guest here in the last year, where we have a program called Carbon Clear Vision, where on all of our itineraries online and elsewhere, there's kind of like a little nutritional score of, where are your emissions coming from this trip? Boats, planes, trains, automobiles, hotel rooms, food, itinerary fluctuations, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's a really great way to just understand where all this is coming from. So the obvious is, how do you decarbonize? How do you reduce the emissions? And it's tough, I think it's something that, especially if you're not vertically integrated, like some of the expedition vessel companies, we don't own a whole lot. So we rely on a lot of influence to our partners. Now, fortunately, that's a huge superpower of ours, whether it's just, in buying power or in just, time-honored relationships, such that we can invest and inject things like electric safari vehicles with partners in Botswana, something that we did just a couple of years ago. And that was a successful endeavor that has now got us to look to elsewhere in the world. We're looking at electrifying our fleet in the United National Parks, in Yellowstone specifically, Peru as well, and then additional vehicles in East Africa as well as Southern Africa. So decarbonization via electrification of our fleet is probably the number one thing. But then there's also kind of this need to understand where your emissions come from. And as we did recalculations over the years and look at some of the things that we maybe thought were some of the biggest offenders, in quotes, it turns out that it has a lot to do with, how long you're using these vehicles, how long they're running, what are they doing? So I'm just going to give you an example here. We do polar bear expeditions in the Canadian Arctic, and most of what we do is via these very large, they're called polar rovers. They're kind of like almost like double wide school buses on big monster truck wheels to rove over the rocks and gravel of these pathways that have been meandering through the tundra. And they're pretty big diesel machines. I mean, they're impressive, and you're like, that thing's got a big footprint. But then as we're sort of recalculating these things, looking at the amount of diesel they're using, whether it's the heaters inside or the actual machines themselves, and it's actually a pretty small percentage compared to just normal day-to-day life. Because they're not traveling fast, they're not traveling far. We go like 2 miles and we sit for 3 hours watching polar bears. All of a sudden, this thing that looks like it has a huge impact maybe doesn't. So I think that that's also something to really look at. Is it's very obvious to look at the big things that look like they take a lot of emissions, but also understanding, doing the research, whether your tour company or tour operator provides that to you or doing your own research, I think is really important to understand what the whole picture actually looks like.
Absolutely. And one question that I was thinking about when it comes to the electric vehicles in these places. Now, do you have the infrastructure and to be able to actually charge the vehicles in these areas? And how do you overcome that if you don't?
We built it. We swung for the fences and we said, you know what, if we're going to do this, if we're not going to be the first to do electric vehicles in Africa, which we weren't, we had been beaten to the punch on that, and that's fine. We certainly congratulate those others. We're like, we should do something pretty big. So let's do an off-grid solar charging station in the middle of the Okavango Delta that has every challenge in front of us: water crossings, remoteness. And so, yeah, we built a solar array at this camp that is specifically designed to charge the batteries of this electric vehicle. And so, like a 4 to 6 hour charge will last something like a 3 to 4 hour game drive, which is pretty typical duration. I won't say it was an easy road. You're talking, and it's sort of like literally and metaphorically, as the vehicle needed different differentials because we're crossing sand, we're going through water, different casing for the batteries. So yeah, it was definitely a lot of learning. And with future vehicles, a big goal of ours is probably to not with each and every one of them have to build this kind of massive 15 kilowatt solar array in the middle of the Kalahari Desert. So on grid kind of plug in the wall charging, I think is a-okay, and that's where we're looking at for the U.S. national park vehicles, Peru, and even in East Africa where some of that infrastructure does exist. So we're kind of pivoting a little bit that way for the subsequent vehicles. Great question though.
Great. Thank you for that. So, Carly, Hurtigruten is aiming to be the first zero emissions passenger ship. So can you tell us a little bit about your solutions and how you measure and how you are your strategy to become this first zero emission ship?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you talked about the transportation. We are the transportation, right?
Yeah.
Up the Norwegian coast. So we have 9 ships. 7 of those ships are the local transportation to 34 ports of call, 365 days a year, regardless of the weather, right? You start getting north of the Arctic Circle. It's more remote, but we do have infrastructure, right? There is infrastructure along the Norwegian coast. But as you said, how this is the second longest coastline in the world. There is wildlife that needs to be protected. There's communities that you need to be working with and protecting. And how do you ensure that you're not disrupting that? So one of the things that we did we did a long time ago, right? We switched to marine fuels. We're not using heavy fuels, and we started using biofuels. And we ensure so over 80% of our food is sourced locally, and we're replenishing our water in ports. So we're doing a lot of those things. We also undertook the biggest fleet upgrade, I would say, in Europe, in the maritime industry anyways, where we updated so that we could reduce both our NOx and our CO2 emissions from the ships. And we focus both on reducing what's going into the air, but also what's going into the sea as well, because they're both critically important. 3 of our ships currently are hybrid electric, and then we have an additional one going in as well. And what that means is we're not running on battery all the time. Battery size is not there yet. But when we need to kick into higher gear, we're not revving the engine or taking more power gas consumption. We are turning on the battery to rev it when we need to rev it a little bit higher, which is really important as well. So that's what we're doing with the existing fleet. Last year, we also announced that we plan to have an emission-free ship by 2030. And so we are working with a consortia, right? Not just us, governments, research institutes, not for profits, to figure out how are we going to make this happen. And last year we released those renderings, and the intent is so it'll be emission free, but also we need to all look at energy consumption, right? So the intent is to reduce the energy consumption of that ship by 40 to 50%. How do you do that? Well, it's wind power, battery. It's also consumers understanding what they're consuming when they're on board. So things like smart cabins where they can actually have an application so they understand, can move up and down the heat or the air ventilation systems, but also understand what they're consuming, which is critically important. But also things like having solar panels, having sails. So wind power, we can reduce that energy consumption by about 10%. Solar panels will help by 2 to 3%. Batteries, this is the part where technology comes in, because the size of the batteries we require don't exist yet today. This is where the communities come in, though. We also need connectivity at the shore, and 3 of the ports of call today have shore power, which is fantastic. But we go into 34 ports of call. Not that they all need shore power, but we need to be working with the governments and the communities to be able to get there. So we're really excited about the progress and the vision towards having an emission-free ship, but still lots of work to do to get to having it on the water by 2030.
This is amazing. So it seems like it's a holistic approach. It's an end-to-end. It's just not just one thing, but really to have the vision to like basically change your fleet to use sustainable aviation fuels, even from the cabin to working with the local communities as well as with governments. I mean, this is an end-to-end solution. This is kind of what we need, you know, to really kind of reshape the way we travel, is to have that whole vision, that end-to-end, you know, vision. So, you know, it's fantastic work that you guys are doing. And Renée, tell us, you know, you also have a lot of challenges in the area that you're in, and of course transportation to take this, you know, people, and for the supplies, probably to ship out waste. So tell us, what are you know, some of the solutions that you found, you know, to be able to reduce your carbon emissions in Tranquilo Bay?
Okay, so first you've got to measure it to see if what you're doing to change it. And so that's one of the things that we started doing a few years back, is measuring where our carbon use is, what we're doing with our boats, because we're all boats. We have no road. Everyone arrives here by boat. And so measuring that kind of stuff and figuring out what's going on. We have the added challenge of there are no professional maintenance situations in Bocas del Toro. So you see most of the boats in Bocas are 2-stroke instead of 4-stroke. Going to electric is even further along. So in that situation, the easiest way to reduce is to use it less. And so what we do is we try and combine trips as much as possible, so that we don't make any, or we make as few unnecessary or few add-on trips as possible. So that's number one. The second thing is that we really track kind of what's going on as far as where are we buying things, how much of it is from Panama. And granted, when we buy something from a store, Panama is a very small country. They're getting it from somewhere else. But the last leg of what we have is the portion that we are directly in control of. As a 9-room eco lodge, you know, we don't have the same power as someone that's necessarily a little bit larger. So what we do is track, for instance, what things are coming from Panama, what things are coming directly from our province, what things are coming from the next province over, within the country, et cetera. And so, for instance, in 2023, we were 77% of things that came from our province and the next province over. I'm going to take that as a pretty good thing. If we can then increase it to where it goes on from there, that's where we go. And so it's things like that we're tracking and trying to be very transparent about what's going on. You know, we are in a very humid environment. It is not a friendly environment towards using alternative fuels. We don't have enough sun necessarily to handle a commercial situation from a solar perspective. There's no wind, there's no water. And so again, best thing to do, at least for the moment, we're tracking it all the time and seeing where things are, use less. And so that's what we're trying to do, is just continually use less. And we track it based upon what is our use based upon the number of guests, because that's really where we know if we're doing better, we're doing worse kind of situation. And so we keep learning more. And as we learn more, we hope to do better. And you know, it depends. We had one round of who we were buying things from and how it was working for, I want to say we were working with one guy for like 10 years. And then out of nowhere, he stopped. And so it's all starting over again and trying to see what's going on, and where we can do it, what we can do. And so that's what we do. You know, each time a new challenge is presented to us, we figure out the answer to the puzzle and which way to go forward. And then once we know kind of where we are, where we stand, okay, what can we do better? Because one of the other things you asked about waste, and so we do move waste out, but we also try and either recycle it or use it for you know, any other types of things, compost and things like that. And so we track that kind of stuff as well. So we try and only move what has to be moved from our island to the other islands where trash and waste management are dealt with. So it's being really aware of what's going on in your operation and where things are, so that you can then take steps to reduce it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love it. It's all about first having that vision and then finding the solutions, and it's not necessarily always have to be all technological solutions. Sometimes it's just the way you change it, the way you operate, so it's very intentional the way you guys are doing your sourcing, which is of course commendable, but you need to have that vision that this is what you aim to do, and then be able to track it and then see results.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to move towards the role that guests play in sustainability efforts. We see a lot of statistics, nowadays that, more and more tourists want to travel sustainably, but are they? Is that really the case? So I want to, talk and reflect a little bit about the tourists. How is that? Are we seeing a change in the demand? And then also, what roles are you playing in educating them in the environmental impact of their trips and encouraging more, eco-conscious behavior and responsible behavior when they travel? So that's like a twofold question. So yeah, let's start with you, Carly.
It's funny, I feel like this discussion comes up almost daily, right? And we talk about it a lot with our partners.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that consumers are aware or want to be more aware. Do I think they're making decisions based on it? Not necessarily. But I do truly believe that the experiences on board, it's our jobs to show them how they can be involved and to educate them on board. And if we can make a small change for them, even in their everyday lives, that they're more conscious when they come back, it's so important. And I'll give you the example of, for myself personally, when I'm on our ships. So as I mentioned, when we go into ports and call, we are replenishing the water on ships. And so when you turn on the water in the bathroom, there is a little sign there to say, please turn off the water when you're not using it. And I didn't realize how guilty I was of leaving the water on while I'm brushing my teeth or whatever it is. And it seems like a small thing, but it's actually a really big thing, right? So for us, we have, that sign in there. We also have it's our Green Stay program. So it's a similar concept to hotels. Like you put the Green Stay program out on your door when you don't, your doorknob, when you don't need your room servicing. So we're not using water, we're not using harsh chemicals, we're not using chemicals or anything to be doing cleaning in the room. And for every night or day you don't do that, we donate 5 NOK to our foundation. And what's great about that is we get a bit of a competition going amongst all of our ships, right? So you were talking about are more people getting involved. So we've been running at about 20% participating. This last quarter, we're at 33%, and the donations were about 150,000 NOK. Our highest participating ship is actually the ship that comes out of Germany and does our signature program along Norway. They were at 43%. So we are seeing that participation increase. And then those funds that are raised go to our foundation that go back to either, wildlife conservation programs or community programs along the coast of Norway or in Svalbard. So we are seeing that involvement. And then because we are focused on education and we have an experienced team on board, and it's not just about the experienced team, although they deliver the lectures and educate around sustainability and the protection of wildlife and the cultures and everything within Norway. I would say everyone on ship, from food and beverage to our housekeeping, everyone is so invested in preserving this beautiful country, right? And so it just becomes part of you. And I do hope and I do truly believe that our guests are taking that home with them and then hopefully incorporating that into their own personal lives, or incorporating a piece of it into their own personal lives.
That's really inspiring. Yeah, one of the things that, people want to travel sustainably, but they just don't know how to. They don't even understand the concept. So, Court, what is your experience in that, Ham?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with a little bit of advice for the person that wants to travel sustainably but doesn't know how to. One of the easiest ways to do so is whomever you're working with, whether you're booking your own hotels or transportation or working with a tour operator, ask them, what's your position on sustainability? Just ask them that. And there's sort of an interesting result. On one side, if they have one, you can now, basically invest your money with them to prop up the industry, prop up sustainability, you know, put your money to the things that you want to see expand more sustainability. Or if they say, we don't really know, but then all of a sudden, if that person has 4 calls that week answering questions about what's my position on sustainability, that goes to their manager, that goes to the executive team, that goes to the board. And all of a sudden we have this market trend going on where everybody's asking about sustainability. What's going on? So it's unequivocally a good and easy thing to do. But I digress. Our overall, yeah, like what are we seeing? Yeah, sustainability is in demand. We've done independent analyses with, you know, our own studies of our own company. We've hired third-party companies to do it, and one of our biggest differentiators out there is sustainability. I think, you know, I don't think it's the only thing that gets people to book a trip. I think it's on people's minds, you know, to Carly's point, like it's still a question as to, you know, are things really apples to apples between us and a competitor or us and like doing it yourself, et cetera, et cetera. There's still a lot of other factors at play, but it's hugely in demand. But I think, you know, to try to not go on for 2 hours here, which I could, this is one of my favorite topics. You know, I think the needle will really move in like a mass market, like the hump of the bell curve, right? Like we're sort of on like the early adopter stage still-ish. But like the majority of people, the 67% of people in the middle of the bell curve in the world will start to really adopt it. I think when sustainability and quality intersect, when doing the sustainable thing actually improves the quality of something. And there are some tangible examples right now. It could be something as little as having cloth napkins that are recycled, reused versus paper throwaway napkins. It could be a field picnic that instead of, you know, leaving the picnic with the guide, the leader putting 15 styrofoam boxes and cups and all that in a big compactor trash bag and hauling it out like Santa over his shoulder. Like nobody wants to see that. It's an unsettling feeling. Instead, having reusable silverware, reusable plates and flatware that gets washed, you know, in the hotel dishwasher afterwards. Like these are all niceties. Our electric safari vehicle is whisper quiet. When we're out in the Okavango Delta watching wildlife, it's not a rumbly diesel engine. That's a nice thing. Sustainability aside, the quality is better. And I think when that starts to get injected in more things, that's where we're going to see the really big turning point. And we're already seeing it, but more of that, the better.
I think you hit a really important topic, you know, is that we need to make it accessible. And you know, sustainability, we can't make it hard. It's not about shaming people, but it's about providing them with the solutions and, you know, that are right for them, you know. So for example, I mean, I always have an example that I try to go to Paris to visit a friend, and it was a 7-hour ride. And I said, well, I'll take the train, you know, on the train is 7 hours instead of a flight to reduce my carbon footprint, but I'll work on the train. There's no internet on the train. So I was stuck there for 7 hours. So you got to make it convenient, you know, as well, in order for people to, you know, to choose correctly. But yeah, Renée, I would love to hear from, you know, your experience when it comes to, you know, inspiring tourists and how they're changing as well. You've had the Eco Lodge for 20 years. So has that changed?
So what we see is kind of what Court's been talking about is, you know, we use cloth napkins. We go out into the field with things that come back each day. We're not using single-use plastics. We're dealing with all of those different things. And so in so doing, we kind of are just trying to be examples of, you know, stewardship's about how you treat your neighbors and the planet wherever you are. And so if I happen to be in Bocas del Toro today, then that's how I'm treating them where I am today. And then when I go home or I go visit somewhere else, it's the same thing. And so how can I adopt some of those processes or some of those practices? I had a group that was here 2 weeks ago, and the group leader's like, hey, these cloth napkins are great. Where'd you get them, or what are you doing? And so, I mean, the people were commenting on it and how they really liked it. And we were using cloth napkins in the lodge, and then we started using them in the field as well. And so it was just another thing to do with that kind of, you know, so that we're showing people it's another way to do it. It's what's going on. We don't have any plastic water bottles. All of our water is rainwater. And so we go through all of that. We fill our own bottles and send them out into the field. Those kinds of things are just really good examples that are easy for people to take back and do on their own. I mean, I go back to the States now and visit family, and it's really unusual that I walk in and somebody's using a plastic water bottle instead of a reusable water bottle. And so I think some of those things have changed with exposure. Not everybody, but definitely more than what you used to see. And I think some of that is, maybe it's from travel, maybe it's from seeing their grandchildren do the same thing, whatever. But they've started using those things and putting those in their day-to-day lives. And I think that's it's a way to be an example, and by example, and if they ask you, why do you use this, and then you explain it, then like, oh, I can do that at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I go back to visit my family in Florida, and I don't see so much of it, actually. I can see more of that. They don't recycle yet. So,
well, it's not 100%, but I will have to say that it has improved over the 20 years that I've been gone, rather than gotten worse. So I'll take that as a win.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered already, many topics, but I want to, also, hone in as well on the carbon measurement piece. We've all touched a little bit on that previously, but there's more and more regulations that are coming in, and so how do you foresee that? What are your main challenges, at the moment, in measuring, these Scope 3 emissions, for example, and how are you tackling that? Court, we can start with you.
Sure. Yeah, so we're a little bit fortunate in that we've been measuring Scope 3 since the very beginning, and over the course of, gosh, over 15, 16, 17 years now of doing these measurements, we're getting better, we're getting more accurate, the calculators are getting better, the offset companies are getting better, everything's just honed. So we've already been doing that. We're in an interesting position in at least our part of the tourism market, is that we're very much in the voluntary market of any sort of carbon offsetting or decarbonization. I wouldn't be opposed if that changed, necessarily. But because we're in the voluntary market, we get to experiment with things. We get to do things a little bit different. We're not strictly regulated on exactly how we do things, and it's up to us to do what we think is the most innovative and best, and also intersecting with most influential. That all being said, yeah, there are some things coming down the pipeline that we're looking at in terms of how you talk about certain things, can you say you're carbon neutral? And my head sort of spins with it. I mean, I'm keeping tabs with it as much as possible, but there's 6 different ways to talk about this concept of being, let's just say, carbon neutral. There's carbon neutral, there's climate neutral, there's climate positive, there's carbon negative, there's, it's like you could just add various adjectives and nouns together, and it's it kind of all means the same thing. So, I don't know if this is going to get honed or what's going to happen, but I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is that you're as accurate as you can be with the tools and the time you have. You are as transparent as possible, and you're not greenwashing. You're not saying stuff you don't do, and you're not trying to, bark bigger than you can bite. If that's probably not a great analogy right here, but nevertheless, you know what I mean? Yeah. Just be truthful, but also be inspiring with it. So I think we have to be very cognizant of it. I think probably within the next 12 months, things are going to be changing a little bit. I've already seen, over the last 10 years, the topic of carbon neutrality, or whatever you might call it, you know, it went from an area where people don't really know much about it. They don't know how it's done, to all of a sudden, I think probably everybody, the vast majority of people, if I were to poll walking on the street, what is carbon neutral, they would at least have heard about it before. I don't know if they could explain it, but they know about it. So the big thing right now is to be progressive. We're a very progressive company. We're always looking to the next thing and the next thing, and looking 5 steps down the line. And it really is decarbonization. So I think as long as you're staying relevant and progressive, doing the right thing, and really looking at it from a science-based perspective, you're going to come out on top.
Absolutely. So this is an aspirational goal. Carbon neutrality is an aspirational goal in the end of the day. And like you said, more and more tools are being developed so that we can measure more accurately, and even in the carbon offsetting world as well. There's more and more tools, out there. But it is always going to be an aspirational goal. So, Carly, do you have anything else to add from your perspective?
Yeah, I was just going to say, very much so, the tools have become so much more so much more accessible, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where we've been focused. And even things to just support what Court was saying, everyone just needs to start measuring, I think you need to start somewhere. And even some of the things that we've started to measure, we're like, we actually don't know if this is good or bad. We just know we need to improve upon it, right? So we've signed up to science-based targets, which I think is really important. We're using a lot of the tools that are out there. You talked about scope 3, like we digitize things where we haven't had things necessarily digitized in the past, which allows us to get out to suppliers, right, and have more frequent touch points with them as well. So the accessibility, but I just, to double down on the point, it is about, number one, it's about accountability, but it's absolutely about transparency. And that's why we started an ESG report 3 years ago. This year when we released it for the first time with our annual report, because honestly, they're not separate. How you do business every day, ESG is absolutely part of that. It should have never probably been separate, but as soon as I saw it, I'm like, oh, that absolutely makes sense, because that's how we all need to be looking at business. And we are accountable because we are putting, what we're reducing or what we're going up if it happens to be going in the wrong direction, and then what we're going to do about that. And we expect to hold ourselves and everyone else to hold us accountable for it.
Absolutely. And Renee, do you have anything else to add to that?
Well, Panama is in a really good shape as a country perspective for this. But one of the things that allows it to be in that position is making sure that its coastlines and that its jungles and things like that stay in place. And so that's really one of the things that we've been trying, both as Tranquilo Bay and then as members of our community, to make sure that people realize if we cut down the mangroves, we're taking away, what's protecting some of these different things. If we cut down the forest, same kind of thing. And so it's just really trying to be there and protect those natural resources along with the measurement and doing all of the other things, because you need to do both. If you take the measurements and you do what you do from that perspective, but then the natural resources go away, then it's got to have both of them in place. And so that's kind of how we're doing it. Being smaller, it's real easy for us to protect an area of land. It's a lot harder to digitize every single thing that we're doing. So we just take it in the ways that are best for our location, which then in turn turn out being best for the rest of the world.
Absolutely. And I like what you said, you also need to tell the story so that you can generate awareness, what you're doing and why you're doing it. So, Cart mentioned, the green washing, some people are saying things that maybe they're not doing, but now there's also a concept of green hushing, which is, basically people not telling the story because they're afraid of being called greenwashing. But I mean, there is a right way to do it. There's enough lingo out there, but there's a right way to be able to, measure your impact, present your impact and inspire, others, to continue, on this path. So I'm conscious of time and I do want to be able to, to get some questions, and we seem to have a few questions.
Can I say something really quick on the scope 3 for the audience out there? Super quick.
Yeah.
So if anybody is looking at scope 3 and overwhelmed, that's very natural. It's like supply chain emissions. And it's $1 million question as to how far down the supply chain you go. And there's like manuals that are almost 200 pages from SBTI that kind of tell you that, but still don't finish the question. Just food for thought. If every entity out there took care of their scope 1 and 2 emissions, we wouldn't have scope 3 to worry about. So like that's like a future that I think we can all maybe get hyped for and envision, is if everybody takes care of 1 and 2, we don't have that supply chain because everybody's taking care of it down the line.
I love that. That is really true. That's really true. So, so let's take some questions, from the audience. So the first one, how do I calculate carbon emissions for accommodations? Okay. Anyone can, even we can take that. Anyone want to take that? Renee, you're in accommodation, so you want to.
I mean, you're looking at the fuel that you're using, and you're looking at all of the different things that you're using, and is it going up? Is it going down? Are you getting economies of scale based upon your occupancy? Kind of where are you with that? And so that's how we do it. We look at what fuel are we using, both on site and then as part of our excursions. What are we using with other things? And is that going down on a per person basis, or is it going up? What do we need to do? Do we need to invest in different boats? Do we need to invest in different technology in order to try and reduce that?
And of course, you talked about the sourcing as well. So
right.
that's a big part of, you know, how you bring your supplies and even dispose of your waste. So for Carly, what type of biofuels and sustainable aviation fuels are you using for your operations?
Yeah, so today we're using marine fuel. We looked at LNG, but we decided to go in a different direction. We also looked at, what was the other? I can't remember, but we've been kind of assessing along the way which ones that we should use, and we've been continuing to alter. So the more recent, which is why we've done 3, almost our 4th hybrid, so bringing on battery to see, because that was the best combination we felt at the time given the technology that was available, right? And so we just continue to monitor what new fuel options there are to see what makes the most sense. And also, we're all running businesses, so it's also, some of them are really expensive right now, right? So it makes it tougher for us to continue to run the business. So that's why we've gone with some literally hybrid options, right? To run batteries in a certain situation where we don't have to run fuel to reduce our emissions. So we've been kind of trying to combination things together, and then continue to look at the roadmap of what's to come.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's a journey. So we can't do everything overnight. So this is from Isa Torres. Hello. We used to work together. So good to see you here. So her question is, hello. We're listening and with students from the course of Ecotourism and Sustainability at the European University of Valencia. Students would like to know more about the lifespan of the batteries and the disposal or possibility to recycle them. So, Court, you want to take that one?
Sure, yeah. So keep in mind, we're very nascent, very early on in this. So we haven't had to dispose them yet, but I do know that there are facilities and ways to do that. I hope that in the 8-year lifespan or 10-year lifespan of our current batteries, new innovations will happen that maybe allows us to retool those batteries and not have them as total loss, complete loss. So yeah, 8 to 10 years is what we're expecting as the lifespan. From the engineers and mechanics, we're told that at that 10-year mark, it's not like they just go belly up. They don't completely call it quits. Their range is just reduced. So what we're thinking of is, as we have vehicles out in Africa specifically, you know, there are kind of 2 places for them to live. You have them in the major cities for airport transfers, like greeting guests upon arrival, and then you have them out in the field doing game drives. And so what our goal is to kind of have this like bookended sandwich, so to speak, of, you know, having them initially for airport arrivals, testing them, making sure they're field ready, getting them out to the field, you know, so like a year or 2, then 6 to 8 years in the field, and then maybe the rest of its life back in cities where if it breaks down, you're not stuck in the middle of nowhere, and where those ranges and the charge times are much more frequent. Like you can do a 20-mile drive and then come back and recharge it. Whereas when you're out on game drive, you need that thing to have as much power and as much longevity as possible. So we're still experimenting, but to answer your question, 8 to 10 years, but we're hoping longer than that.
And for new technology to help us, you know, not have to waste them, for sure. So the next question is for all panelists. Are such efforts, okay, wait, hold on. No, sorry, I skipped it. So how can destination management organizations or community DMOs support you in furthering your decarbonizations efforts? For example, communications to travels, policy support. Well, this is good because I was actually, you know, I had other questions, you know, related on the collaboration, you know, part of it. So, you know, if you guys can speak a little bit more on how you work with destination management organizations.
I'll go first. We work with the Chamber of Tourism here in Bocas, and then we have a destination management committee that is private partner or private-public partnership situation. And, you know, what we need help on in that perspective is any of the regulations and any of the laws associated with it that will help. For instance, here in Panama, doing anything that is alternative energy, there's no tax benefit. And so long run, you'd need to have the tax benefits associated with it. But then also through that, you develop the communication style and what you want people to know both about your destination and what you need of the tourists that are coming to your destination. And then that can in turn be shared with any of the DMOs that are sending people to the destination or people who are selling it, so that they understand what the challenges are and how the destination is working with those challenges.
Absolutely. More collaboration is needed. Carly, you want to add anything else to that? You also collaborate with the destinations.
Yeah, we do. And we collaborate with the local, like with Innovation Norway as well. And I think too, for us, it's continuing to push on to continue to push on regulation, to be honest. And I know it scares some, but we need to keep pushing on it. And for us specifically in Norway, we need more regulation around cruise. We actually don't have a cruise regulation, period. So that's something that needs to be worked on. And I think that all of us together need to be pushing on that.
Well, I understand that in the fjords by next year.
Yeah, so there is there is going into the fjords that you have to be emission free.
Yeah.
In certain fjords starting next year. Yeah.
Yeah. That's revolutionizing. I really hope that expands across the world.
Yeah.
I will go to the next question for all panelists. Are such efforts then circulate to the local communities so that can enhance their understanding and improve their community well-being? Any examples? Okay, so examples, to working with local communities and to enhance their understanding. So, Court, you want to take this one?
Like understanding of specific sustainability projects, like the e-vehicle, for instance, or just understanding of like valuation of conservation travel in general. There's a lot of ways I could answer this.
Yeah, I think that, they want to know, how to work with community to enhance their understanding, on sustainability, and then in how also, probably your efforts are supporting their well-being.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I got that. So, I mean, the starting point is really that local communities are the stakeholders. They're who we want to be running these operations. They're who can benefit most from protecting a natural area and garnering income from permit fees and training local guides and running the hotels and restaurants. So we want them to be front and center. How can we imbue sustainability values and teachings? I think that's up to the tour operator to work directly with the lodge, with the hotel, with the whatever activity you're embarking in. So I think it's a two-way street. The local communities need to demonstrate an interest and hunger for it. There have been times when we try to change behaviors or change practices towards a more sustainability route, and folks just say, this is too hard. This is pointless. Like, that's not the right attitude. So they're probably not going to receive as either much business or as much education on the sustainability front. Whereas if we go to a local community and they're just asking us for more and they're bugging us and they're asking us too many questions, it's like, that's a good problem to have. Like, great, you guys are going to be the next model ecotourism destination. So that's great too. As a very specific example, which is where I thought you might be going at first, is with the electric safari vehicle. Really cool outcome of this is that, not only is it reducing emissions and making a better game driving experience through the quiet, non-rumbling of the vehicle, but we're training solar array technicians and lithium ion battery engine technicians in the local villages. The same company that had us do the diesel to electric conversion flies out and leads training sessions. They want to hire technicians because they can't afford to come out and fly across the Okavango Delta every time they've got to tinker with something. So then all of a sudden we're setting up these local communities for the next generation of tourism, the next generation of vehicles. And I think that's really exciting.
That is really exciting. How that's supporting the destinations. It's incredible. It's almost been an hour. So I'm conscious of time. So I think I'm going to start with the poll we have here. So before we conclude, we love to get some of your inputs. So we're gonna put a little poll out there. So if you just can take a minute to answer that poll. While we're setting that up, I'm gonna take one more question. And that is for all panelists. What are you doing about the flights? The CO2 offsetting, and if so, who is your partner with that? Anyone want to take that one up?
I'm happy to jump in first. So yeah, that's actually big news. We had not been doing flights as far as offsets for the first 10 years or so of being carbon neutral, because it is a huge chunk. Like, just be honest, like of our like 38,000 metric tons a year, more or less, we are, like 80% of that is the international flights, because we're on all 7 continents, right? And it's a huge chunk. So we hadn't been doing that, but in 2019, we decided, you know what? Let's no longer put the impetus on the guest to offset their own flights. Let's just go ahead and do it for all of our guests. For many years, we were trying to like make an easy button on guests' invoices to add offsetting for their flights, and be something like $40 or $50 a guest. It wasn't an insurmountable amount, but if you can imagine, added over many guests, that was a huge budget item. But eventually, we took it upon ourselves. We added it. Sustainable Travel International is a fantastic choice to go with offsetting. We are with a different outfit for the last few years, but nothing's ever set in stone. We're with a company called South Pole, and we've been working with them nicely. But STI is a great choice.
Thank you for that. All right. Carly or Renee, do you want to add to that? Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, first of all, I want to, thank you, the speakers, for coming on today and for sharing your expertise. So I'm really grateful for the incredible experience and for, the open conversation that we've had. I really enjoyed it. It's very insightful, and I really love the solutions, from like the simple solutions all the way to the high-tech solutions, and the working with the communities and the collaboration with the communities. I think that's, it's really important for all of us to work together. It's all about from the operators to the tourists to the communities, as well as its policy developers, as well as as the policy advisors. We all need to work together in order to be able to create a tourism that is low carbon, or to create low carbon products. So I really enjoyed this discussion. Thank you again for answering the questions. We're going to continue to bring you more of these webinars, more information for us to be able to tackle some of these really important issues. You have our information as well. And Court gave us a really good shout out. We can help you with end-to-end solutions when it comes to carbon measurement, when it comes to decarbonization strategies, climate action planning, all the way to mitigating your carbon through carbon offsetting, as well as training, and ultimately telling the story in marketing. So we can support you in your end-to-end solutions across the board in any of your operations. So thank you again, for joining today for this important conversation. I hope you guys all feel inspired, and continue to push the boundaries and to work towards decarbonizing tourism operations. And so with that, safe travel and keep on working together for a net zero future. So